All right. I don't know if I'm live yet. If I'm live yet, let me know in the chat. I'm trying to control things exclusively from my OBS software. How's it going, Nick? Good to see you. Glad you're here. I think you're going to like this one, Nick. Let me pop over. I'm just going to take a look at the stream here. I am live. Good. I'm 15 seconds in, according to YouTube studio page and OBS. So how's it going, everybody? Good to see you. We've got an interesting one lined up today. We're going to be taking a look at Acts 28:29. And when he said these words, the Jews departed and had a great dispute among themselves. This is going to be a good one. So hopefully you're looking for a live stream tonight that is free from political rhetoric and the U.S. election and stuff. Some good stuff happening over there, I would think. That's about all I'm going to comment on it. As a Canadian, we got the popcorn out and watched last night as the numbers just kept rolling in. That's about all I'm going to do, because chances are you are here watching me talk about textual criticism and the Byzantine text instead of watching all the lefties meltdown over the election results last night. Ross Lewichuk, how's it going? Good to see you. Friendly neighborhood Jesus freak. I know we've been talking a little bit in the text stream. Nick, good to see you here. Debo, how is it going? And Scott, we got Scott VM. He's got his ban hammer polished and ready to go. We're good for leaving people talk and share their opinions and stuff in here, but we don't do with personal attacks. Personal attacks will get you muted or banned or whatever. I don't know. Scott's the man, so whatever he decides is what's going to happen. With that being said, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time with introductory stuff. So I just want to show you just at a quick glance what we've got here, and then we'll get into the details. Hey, Get Gnomed, how's it going? Good to see you. Glad you made it. All right, so we're going to talk about Acts 28:29. I've got Metzger's commentary, which I thought I had opened up to the right page here. Let's borrow that so nobody else borrows it on me. Good to see archive.org is finally up and running. I haven't been able to get my material off here because if you aren't aware, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a big hack on archive.org, a DDoS attack, and so they shut everything down. Notwithstanding, apparently some lawsuit issues. They're debating whether or not they're allowed to share books like they're doing here, so we may have to actually go and purchase these books. And I think this one actually is not so badly priced. At $30, 30 Canadian dollars anyway. So what's that, like $5 American? But yeah, these textual books tend to get a bit expensive, so it's often better to look them up on something like archive.org. Excuse me. So I'm going to flip over to the page here. We're going to be taking a look at Metzger's commentary on this. I think Metzger's got this one wrong. He explains this as a Western interpolation, but I don't think there's any justification for calling this specific reading a Western text, and I'll show you that a little bit later here. We'll see how much I remember. We got to go to the end of Acts here. Where are we going here? On the other, while we're waiting for these pages to load here, the other kind of exciting news is I noticed some construction crews coming down my road the other day. Now, we live in the sticks, 45 minutes, about an hour to the next major city. And so we don't have very high-speed internet up here. We have Starlink, which is great. It does the job mostly. I know you're still seeing a little bit of that stuttering, but we are going to be getting fiber within the year. So once they get that fiber going, my upload speeds are going to be consistent. I'll be able to get some super high quality stuff rolling without the hassle of everything else. We're almost there. There it is. Okay, so I'm teasing you at this point because I'm just saying we're gonna go into Metzger here a little bit, and then I've got a handy dandy map that's going to give us a bit of insight into this variant in what's happening. Now, I haven't plotted this out as much as I have plotted out Mark 16, 9 through 20, but there's some interesting things to see there. So let's start by opening up our passage here. Let's zoom this in just so we're ready. Just so we're ready when we get rolling here. All right. All right. So Acts 28:29. Let's do a little bit of context here. We'll go up to is it 21? So at this point, you got to remember that what's happening at the end of the book of Acts is Paul is on house arrest. He's waiting to go and appeal to Caesar. Actually, there it is. But when the Jews spoke against it, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, not that I had anything of which to accuse my nation. So he's appealing to Caesar to be released so that he can continue on. And apparently, historically, based on all the stuff that you see in the epistles, we can sort of deduce that Paul was released from Rome, from house arrest, and he went on a third missionary journey. Now, while he was on house arrest, he took the opportunity to continue to preach the gospel to everybody who would come to his home. Starting at verse 20, it says, "For this reason, therefore, I have called for you to see you and speak with you, because for the hope of Israel I am bound with chains." So this is Paul offering his thing. Then they said to him, "We neither received letters from Judea concerning you, nor have any of our brethren who have come reported or spoken any evil of you. But we desire to hear from you what you think, for concerning this sect we know that it is spoken against everywhere." So, if you want to know about the Christians, you go and talk to Paul, right? If you want to know about the way, you go and talk to Paul. I'm going to skip down here. So after he had spoken, so when they had appointed him a day, many came to him at his lodging, to whom he explained and solemnly testified of the kingdom of God, persuading them concerning Jesus from both the law of Moses and the prophets, from morning till evening. So Paul, it's really cool because people are coming to him for the gospel. He's not going out people are coming to him at this point for the gospel. And some were persuaded by the things which were spoken, and some disbelieved. So when they did not agree among themselves, they departed after Paul had said one word, and that is right here. The Holy Spirit spoke rightly through Isaiah the prophet to our fathers, saying, "Go to this people and say, hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of these people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. Therefore let it be known to you that salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will hear it." So this is the big proclamation, and it's fitting for the end of the book of Acts, right? That salvation isn't just for Jewish people, it's also for the Gentiles. And at this point, right, what you can see here is a number of people are very likely going to be very offended at what Paul is saying. A number of Jewish people are going to be very offended at this. Like, what do you mean the Gentiles? God's going to save the Gentiles? Well, of course he is. But they don't know that. And they still have this sort of idea in their head that Gentiles are like barbarians and we don't like them, right? So in verse 29, after Paul says this, it says, "And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had a great dispute among themselves." Now, this is the thing. After we talk about the dispute, then it goes on to say, "Then Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own rented house and received all who came to him." And it continues on to narrate the end of the book of Acts there. Now, here's the interesting thing here, is if you take the passage out, if you remove that, then you go into Paul's preaching style and what he was preaching about, and then you move right into what Paul was doing in his, quote, rented house. So the question is whether this verse here is part of the scriptures or whether it is not part of the scriptures. And in your critical text translations, so mostly we'll go through some of them, they will not contain the verse. They will have a footnote for the verse saying essentially that some manuscripts don't contain it. Now, the reality is, I'll just up front, right, these are my presuppositions, is the Byzantine text type contains this verse very much so. The numbers are rather staggering. So you're looking at about 95%, excuse me, of our manuscripts contain this verse. And it's a lot of the minuscules, mostly minuscules. There's a couple uncials, and there is 2 references in the early church fathers which are interesting, which is going to help us pin this down a little further. As is the exercise, we're going to go through and see why the Byzantine text form is right in this situation. Now, let's take a look at a few other manuscripts on the brain. Take a look at a few of the English translations before we go in there, and before we do that, we'll just take a quick look at the comments to keep those up to date here. So we have, we'll change the scene. There we go. All right. Okay, so we got Ross Lewichuk, greetings from Merritt, Silver Springs. Get Gnomed, good to see you. You made it. Pastor Brett says you have a Jeremiah study Bible. Very good, very good. I don't know much about Dr. David Jeremiah. I don't really know much about what he believes. I know that he's really popular and a lot of people reference his stuff. But Pastor Brett's ready for this. Y'all ready for this? What's wrong, Debo? I was having viewing malfunctions. Oh, yeah. We'll see. The stream looks like it's doing pretty good today. I'm dropping a couple frames, but not very often, so it's good. No, Paul died in his Roman prison. He did die in a Roman prison, as far as I know, but he did get out and do another missionary journey. His rented house was his house arrest prison, yeah. May I see Acts 28:29, when he had said these words, the Yehudim went away and had a great dispute among themselves. Yeah, I don't know what that one is, what that version is you're reading from. LSB has it in brackets. That's right. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the footnotes here. One more comment. Mr. Moreno, how's it going? Good to see you. The Nabre, the Western text, had added here a verse that is not found in the best Greek manuscript. And when he had said this, the Jews left seriously arguing among themselves. Yeah. So that's really interesting because the Nabre, I should probably start looking at the Nabre. It sounds like there's some interesting stuff in there. But it looks like he's just parroting Metzger here. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say this whole bit about this being a Western reading comes from Metzger. You're also going to see that this is also parroted in the New English translation. So it's referring back to Metzger's work again when referring this as a Western reading. Now I'm going to debate that idea of it being a Western reading. All right. So let's take a look at some of these English Bible translations. So the ESV, there's verse 28. Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. With a footnote here, it says, some manuscripts add verse 29. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed, having much dispute among themselves. So again, some manuscripts, so you know what? Let's go like this. There we go. Excuse me. Again, it says some manuscripts, right? Some manuscripts, when the reality is it's most or majority or most, 95% of manuscripts contain this. Now, there are a couple notes in here amongst the editions that are better, but you can see they just skip verse 29. And that's kind of, what I'm going at with the title of this, where did the verse go? Why is this verse number missing? Because the verse number is literally not there. It's anyone who can count, right? From 27, 28, 30 would be like, where's 29? Where's verse 29? Okay, I'm getting a little stuttering. Okay. I'm going to guess it's probably when I'm shifting things. I'll just pause a little bit while it's loading. Maybe that'll help the stuttering. All right, so in the LSB, I almost called the NASB. The NASB 95 edition has it in square brackets. When he had spoken these words, the Jews departed, having great disputes amongst themselves. And the note here is a little bit better. It doesn't give the whole story, but it's a bit better. And the note says, early manuscripts do not contain this verse. So that's true. Early manuscripts do not contain this verse. But there are some earlier sources than our earliest manuscripts, which do contain this verse. And we'll take a look at that. Yeah, you know what, Scott? I was a little bit kind of, NASB, like it's another critical text translation. But I'm actually starting to think it's probably one of the better critical text translations, just because it leaves these verses in the body, and I think most of these verses are scripture. So we just kind of ignore that the square brackets are there and treat it like scripture. You'd be all right. All right. So the NIV. Now, this, I believe, is the 2011 edition. Again, they do the practice of putting the verse number when the verse is missing in square brackets. So the verse number is in square brackets. And we have our footnote here. Some manuscripts include here after he said this. Now, again, some manuscripts is just not a good, it's not a good modifier. It's just not a good descriptive word because it's not some, it's most. The NLT, I think, is different here. So we got an asterisk, again, skips verse 29 as if it doesn't exist, right? Goes 28, 29, 28, 30, skips 29. Understandable why they do that. If you're a critical text guy, you don't want to mess up the rest of the order of the passages. But still, it leaves us with a question. Well, where's verse 29? And so their answer to that is, Some manuscripts add verse 29. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed greatly disagreeing with each other. So again, some manuscripts, not a very helpful note, a rather misleading note, because the reality is most manuscripts omit this verse. Now, I suspect the reason why they would say something like some manuscripts is because they don't want to say most manuscripts, because out of fear of suggesting that a majority reading is the better reading. And of course, those who are putting these critical texts together don't want anything to do with the majority text. So that's a very generalized sweeping statement, but you get what I mean. Now, the CSB, the reason why I do these seven versions is because these are kind of like the mainstream modern English Bible translation. This gives us a pretty good idea of what's out there. A super majority of manuscripts add. That's right. My lingo for my previous videos, because it is a super majority, 95%. So again, in the CSB, they skip verse 29. And the footnote here is some manuscripts include verse 29. Again, a super majority of manuscripts include verse 29. Now, the CSB is interesting. It's almost too bad, too, because the CSB, it was supposed to be a majority text translation. This would have been our only majority text translation. But I think it was Arthur Farstad passed away halfway through the completion of the project. And then the gentleman, I forget who it was, who took over, wanted to move it back over to critical text translation. So he just added another Bible translation to the pool of critical text New Testaments. But nonetheless, how's it going, Andy? Good to see you. And then finally here, the NET Bible. This one is good because we got a nice, long, lengthy note we can take a look at. So therefore be advised that the salvation from God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. And then verse 96, note 96, says this. This is essentially a parrot of Metzger. Okay, you got to realize that. It says, some later manuscripts include 28-29. When he had said these things, this is so bad. Some later it's like almost all the later manuscripts contain it. That's interesting. Almost all. It's a small handful. In fact, I was able to write them all down in a spreadsheet. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But anyway, so some later manuscripts include 28-29. When he had said these things, the Jews departed, having a great dispute. I'm reading that because I know it's probably too small for everybody. A great dispute among themselves. Verse 29 is lacking in P74. Aleph, A, B, E, C, 48, 048, 33, 81, 1175, 1739, 2464, PC, and a number of other versions. So I actually took a look at the ECM for this because they have a bigger list of manuscripts. So they are included with few minor variations in the majority. That's the Gothic M. It has and in some versions. So the versions were interesting for this one, the ancient versions, but they didn't really. I don't think they really helped the question with this one, and you'll see why as we go through it. So this verse is almost certainly not a part of the original text of Acts, as it lacks the best credentials. The present translation follows NA in omitting the verse number, a procedure also followed by a number of other modern translations. Now, this is interesting. I said that this was going to be verbatim from Metzger, but it's not. The NET here, I just noticed this, did not go back and call it a Western reading. I'm surprised at that. I really am. I'm surprised at that. But what they did say was this verse is almost certainly not part of the original text of Acts, as it lacks the best credentials. Now, this is unfortunate because nobody here knows what they mean by the best credentials. Can you explain? Like, this is the Net Bible. They right? There's no expense taken to the size of the margins in the Net Bible. So you could have at least told us what the credentials are. Okay? If you're going to say it's not there because it lacks the best credentials, what are the best credentials? What are the best credentials? Put them in there. You've seen the footnotes in the NET Bible. They're huge. They didn't spare any expense, okay? You think the guy in Jurassic Park, we spared no expense, right? When it comes to the marginal notes in the New English Translation, put the credentials in there. They should put the credentials in there. I would love to see their reasoning instead of just pushing it off, right? That's like coming into Metzger's, Metzger's commentary where he'll say something like, well, the committee just decided that this was the better reading with nothing else, with no other details. Come on, NET. You dropped the ball here. You dropped the ball. Fortunately, we're going to take a look at this in a little more depth. So there we go. That's where our English Bible translations are. We'll take a look at a few other things here, but first we're going to go back, take a look at the comments, see what y'all are saying. Okay. All right. So Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says, where am I here? Their predecessor, the Confraternity New Testament, is good, though, for what it is. Okay. You know what? I'm going to start, I'm going to put the Nabre in my tool chest of things to use when looking at these variants, because there's some interesting stuff in there. Okay, NKJV notes, yes, from Dr. David Jeremiah. Friendly Neighbor Jesus Freak has it in square brackets from the Confraternity New Testament, would be my guess. Scott VM says, love me some square brackets. Pickering and Boyd have it, yes. Really, manuscripts is Codex Sinaiticus. Well, it's more than that, actually. The unseals are split. They are split, and we'll see that in a moment. Earliest and best manuscripts. The amount of times I've heard this, I know, right? Earliest and best. Pastor Brett says earliest manuscripts are Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and Alexandrinus and Bizet, and what was the other? The five main ones: Alexandrinus, Bizet, Ephraemi Rescriptus. Yeah. And then Sinaiticus Vaticanus. Mr. Moreno, NRSV, other ancient authorities add. That's actually a very misleading note. Other ancient authorities add. Because aside from the early church, like, again, it depends on what they mean by ancient. Like, what's the cutoff day of ancient? Yeah. Yeah, because this really isn't in our oldest manuscripts. But that doesn't mean it's not original. You'll see in a moment. CEB, critical editions of the Greek New Testament do not include. Yeah, that's accurate. I don't know how helpful that is, but it's accurate. Knox Bible, this verse is wanting in some manuscripts. Yeah, totally not helpful. All that's really saying is there's a problem here. You'll have to go look at it. That's really all it is. You really that? I'm not sure what you're saying. All right. So Andy Nguyen says hi. Scott VM says a super majority of manuscripts add. That would be better. And some discussion there with Andy. Best credentials equals trust me, bro. I don't know. Like when you got nothing else there, that's essentially what it is. It's resting on the authority of the commentator, which essentially is trust me, bro. When you don't share the work. Gekkenoned is not saying the verse is found in some manuscripts a lie. Is not saying the verse is found. Well, it is found in some. It's not that it's a lie. The problem with it is it doesn't paint enough of the picture. How much is some, right? Like these are words that aren't defined. And I almost guarantee if you were to go into the preface of these Bibles, which I probably should at some point, they're not going to define what they mean by some. And some is such a subjective word. And so it leaves it open to many ways of interpreting. It's just not helpful. Yeah, so a Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says best equals Sinaiticus or Vaticanus. Yeah, and then bestest is when Sinaiticus and Vaticanus agree, right? Pastor Brett, are you NKJV? Yes. How can you trust it? It's been tampered with. I don't understand what's happening there. NKJV is not tampered with. It's in the KJV. Ross Lewichuk says Pickering gets it right. A footnote says that some manuscripts add this verse, their way of referring to 95%. I will note the uninformed reader. Will not the uninformed reader be misled? Absolutely. Whether it's intentional or not, I try not to speak to intentions. So whether it's intentional or not, it's going to mislead somebody. So that's exactly what he points out. And I took a look at Pickering stuff here. So Pickering is interesting. The apparatus is very it's pretty solid. So In this instance here with Acts 28 and 29, it is available in the Textual Textfort. When they pronounce that right. And so what that is a project where they picked out a lot of the more important textual variants and did a complete collation, basically as many manuscripts as they can get a hold on, to take a look at these variants. So just for the record, this passage here in Acts 28-29 is in Textual Textfort, and I think there was more than 400 manuscripts which contained the verse, and then there were very few, I think on the order of I want to say about 20 manuscripts which did not contain it. And that's like that's the balances. Now I know we don't base things off a majority text, right? We're Byzantine priority, not majority. So because it's in it's a consensus Byzantine reading, I would tend to agree with it. However, I want to show you some of the work behind the scenes. So I'll keep going here. Where were we here? The verses in the TR, the preserved word of God. Yes, the verse is definitely in the Textus Receptus. Pickering gets it right, yes. Other ancient authorities, right, we went through that. Someone else was talking about that. I get genomed. If the comma is not trustworthy, why is it in the text? I think that the doctrine of the Trinity that is in the comma is trustworthy. It's clearly a doctrine espoused throughout all the rest of the scriptures. The question isn't whether the doctrine it teaches is trustworthy, right? I can write a document about how to get saved in the gospel, and that would be true, right? But it's not scripture. So the question isn't whether it's true. The question is whether it was written by the apostle, right? That's our stance on inspiration. Again, it's coming up. 1 John 5:7-8 is coming up. I'd like to get Mike and Mike on the channel before I talk about that one. But nonetheless, if I can't get them on in time, we will go through it, and then we'll have Mike and Mike come on afterwards. So Mr. Moreno says, I'll still take other ancient authorities over the oldest and best manuscripts submit. Absolutely. Pastor Brett says, if it's in the text is tampered with. Yeah, by a very strict definition. Absolutely. So get known, Pastor Brett, the comma is part of the first epistle of John. Scott VM, the phrase other ancient authorities makes me think the quotes from the church. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. That's exactly where I go. Pastor Brett, the notes say something else. Helga Evanson, how's it going? Good to see you. If you said under COVID that you had some guests in your house when in reality you had many guests, was that a lie or just misleading? Well, the secret is you just don't tell anyone that there are any guests, whether some or many. It makes no difference. I'm talking about the text. Very many, not the doctrine, yeah. So Andy Nguyen, the Nabra notes are notorious among Catholics like myself for being not theologically sound, but it's the translation used in the modern Roman Rite liturgy. Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. And then last comment here before we move on. Scott VM, yes, ancient authorities opens the door to translations, quotations, lectionaries, etc. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to nerd out for a second here. I provided a spreadsheet. And in this spreadsheet, I have got minuscule manuscripts and uncial manuscripts and translations. So this is just kind of whipped together here just to put some sort of format around what we're looking at. But what I've done is I've collected all the minuscules that have omitted this passage. And there's a couple interesting things to note here. Excuse me. The age of the minuscule manuscripts aren't as important. Typically, you start seeing them around the 9th century, and they go up to the printing press. So 9th century is considered early as far as a manuscript, minuscule manuscript is concerned. 10th century, 9, 10, 11 are early. 12 up to the printing press, I would consider them later. So there is a little bit of early support for the omission of this text. Okay. And remember what the count is, though. Here I've got about 15 minuscule manuscripts that do not contain the verse. And then those who don't contain it here, I've got about 7. So one including the papyri, and then our favorite, our oldest and best, right? So yeah, we got like I think it's like 22 manuscripts there that do not have the verse. Now, note very carefully the text type of these manuscripts. Okay, Alexandrian of GA 33. We have one Byzantine manuscript. Let me just highlight that. One Byzantine manuscript that doesn't contain this passage. Just one. That's it. One Byzantine manuscript. One. And this is considered to be KX. Now, I believe if you look it up on the wiki site, there's supposedly some Western or Alexandrian intrusions on this one, but for the most part, it's considered Byzantine. Now, this would be part of the KX family. So the KX family represents the biggest chunk of manuscripts that are grouped together. So it's just one of those doesn't contain this verse. Now, you'll notice we have some mixed texts. So when we have a mixed manuscripts, it means that there's readings from all the various different text types in there. Alexandrian, Byzantine, Western, Caesarean. Some think Caesarean isn't even really a thing. Some think Western and Alexandrian isn't really a thing, but we're just going to assume they are for the time being. And then you notice a couple which are unknown. We don't have the details because that manuscript hasn't been studied enough to come to a decision on where it sits. So we have Alexandrian, unknown, Alexandrian. So you're starting to kind of get a picture amongst the minuscules what kind of reading this is. This really appears to be a reading that is either in an Alexandrian manuscript for the most part, or it's going to be in a mixed manuscript aside from the ones we don't know about. Do you see any Western manuscripts in here? I do not see any Western manuscripts in here. Nothing labeled Western in here. Now, if you come over to the unsealed manuscripts, okay, the unsealed manuscripts which omit this are here. We've got P74, okay, 7th century papyrus manuscript. Doesn't contain it. I didn't put it in there, but I believe this is an Alexandrian manuscript. We've got 01, 02, and 03, Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus, right? Aleph is Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus. There we go. 4th, 5th, and 4th century. They don't contain it. They are Alexandrian. We have 08, and this is the first time. This is the first time we see a Western manuscript. That's key. First time. Then we got a mixed manuscript. I believe this is a Western Alexandrian Byzantine mixed manuscript. And then we've got, again, another Alexandrian manuscript omitting this verse. So the question is this a Western reading? Okay, well, maybe we got to go to the Latin to figure it out, right? Before we go to Latin, let's take a look at the unseals that contain the passage. Now, I didn't bother to write down all of the manuscripts that contain it because there's about 400 and some from all different centuries, mostly Byzantine manuscripts which contain this. So when we come to the unseals that contain it, okay, we have our earliest ones from the 9th century are all Byzantine. One from the 10th century, which is Byzantine as well. So the edition is definitely a Byzantine, I call it an edition. The passage is definitely a Byzantine passage. What's interesting is we look at this and go, oh, 9th century. So that means it's late. And so we can't have Acts 29 anymore because it doesn't show up till the 9th century. But that isn't entirely true. We come back to the omissions. We compare the 9th century with, oh, look, there's a 4th century and a 5th century and a 4th century and a 6th century and a 7th century. Like that puts it in the bag, doesn't it? But not so fast. So the early unseals that we have here do not contain it. The later unseals do. So again, how do we justify maintaining it in the text if the early ones don't? We come down to the Old Latin. Does the Old Latin help us out here? For the inclusion of the verse, we have AR at 9th century. E, I believe, is a mistake here. So I pulled this information from Wayne Mitchell's 4th edition Greek New Testament. He's got a really decent apparatus in there. Has some of the versional stuff that I don't often see in other places. But I think he made a mistake here in including E here because he also included it as part of the omission. So E is actually, E is technically an omission. So I should probably just delete that. I'm pretty sure that E is an omission. So anyway, of the Old Latin, AR, Gigas, P, PH, W, again, very late manuscripts in the Old Latin in the Old Latin tradition. The Old Latin tradition. There we go. So you can't really rely on the Latin manuscripts here. Now these include it, but they're very late. Now you probably hear someone saying, "See, Dwayne, it's late. It's a late edition." Okay. We have this in the Clementine Vulgate. We have this in the Syriac Herclean. So this gets a little bit earlier. We're starting to get around the 6th century, right? Armenian, we have a manuscript in Armenian. Now, the Ethiopic versions were, excuse me, were really interesting because, and I don't think they're entirely helpful. Why? Because this Ethiopic version is a single collated edition from the 12th century. It's very late. To represent what might have been early. And this is compared with another edition of the Ethiopic version, the Peloplat edition, which was put together in the 1800s. So these are really way too late, in my opinion, to be useful. So I just don't see these as being specifically helpful. Again, the Slavic edition, as far as is inclusion, my understanding is that our Slavic manuscripts are typically later. We're talking 10th century or more. So amongst these, we have very late manuscripts. So we come down to the manuscripts which omit it. We have the Peshitta, which omits it. We have some Armenian manuscripts which omit it. And of course, the Georgian following the Armenian will omit that as well. And then we have a 6th century manuscript in Old Latin omitting it, and another 6th century manuscript in Old Latin omitting it. And then the rest, we have a 10th and a 13th. So it looks to be really early, but there's one thing that I didn't tell you. It's this. We have witnesses from the church fathers, most notably from Chrysostom. There we go. From Chrysostom, who hails from the 4th century. Now, if you remember our last live stream, we were talking about Chrysostom, and he is in the East. Now, this paints an interesting picture for us, because I want to pull up the textual commentary here and read to you what Metzger's saying. And Metzger is saying this. He says, the Western expansion, okay, I think he's taking too much. There we go. I think he's taking way too much freedom in expressing a Western expansion. He shows it represented by a couple minuscules. A few of the Old Latin manuscripts that we have. He has Vulgate manuscripts, the Syriac Herclean with a corrector. So he calls it a Western expansion. It was adopted by the Byzantine text and lies behind the AV rendering. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had great reasoning among themselves. The addition was probably made because of the abrupt transition from verse 28 to verse 30. So he's trying to explain why it was added, and he seems to think that the transition from verse 28 to verse 30 just was hard for people to wrap their minds around, and so someone put something in to smooth it out. And again, that's all conjecture, right? Like he's just trying to explain his position by doing it this way. So I don't find that particularly what's the term, convincing. I think it's just him trying to explain away why he thinks, and there's no evidence or anything to suggest that kind of what's the term, that kind of intention, and you would have to ask who and when, and we just don't have the answers. This is all what's the term, I just totally lost the term. Anyway, you know what I'm getting at. It's all made up. It's all imagination. Okay, so he's calling it a Western expansion. And so why is he calling it a Western expansion? If we take a look at our evidence again, he's probably calling it a Western expansion based essentially on this manuscript and this manuscript. These would be too late to make any determinations on what kind of text it is. These would be too late to really determine what kind of text it is. If this was going to be a Western expansion, it would be something from much earlier. But when we go into the Greek text and we take a look at the Greek manuscripts, we don't see anything amongst the unseals that justify us calling this a Western expansion. There's nothing. You would think that a manuscript can, like Codex D maybe, but Codex D doesn't have Acts in it, right? But you'd think we would have something from the early centuries to suggest that it was a Western expansion. We don't have that. Now, I want to come down here. I know we're looking at 08, which says Western. We highlight. It's the only one. It's the only one. But if we take a look, and this is where I think it kind of kills the whole idea of a Western expansion, is Chrysostom here. Now, let's see if I do Bible Hub. Let's see what happens here. We can go to commentary. Let's do Acts 28. No, it was. Where do I get the homilies from? I always find it in Google. I can never like navigate it from the page. It's really funny how this works. Let's just go like, let me try that. Homilies, Acts 28:17, Bible Hub. I should have pulled this up earlier. Okay, here we go. Now, what's interesting here, okay, is again, when you're looking at the homilies, you don't often see the quote of the passage you're looking at under the commentary of the passage you're looking at. In this instance, I think it was under Acts 28:17, excuse me, where he references 28:29. In fact, if you come down here, you can see that the homilies don't have anything in it for Acts 28:29. Now, let me make this bigger for everybody. There we go. Now, I am going to go to Acts 28:17. Actually, we can even do this. This would be quicker. Was it? What did we say here? It was near the bottom of the second paragraph. There it is. So, be it known therefore unto you that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had great reasoning among themselves. And Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own house. So there it is. That's that right there. That is Chrysostom quoting Acts 28:29 in his commentary on 28:17. Now, the cool thing about Chrysostom is he is quoting from the, when is it? The 4th century. The late to early 5th century, the mid to early 5th century, mid 4th, early 5th century. So where does that put him on the timeline of things? If we come back to our passages here, or our manuscripts here, Chrysostom, he is around the time of Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So he is contemporary, essentially, with these manuscripts. And so we have this reading in the East, in the middle of the 4th century, the end of the 4th century. We have it there. So we need to take a look at a map for this to make sense. And this is what I think really puts the nail in the head of the question of calling this a Western reading. Let me pull up my picture here. And before we dive into this, let's take a look at the comments. All right, comments. Here we go. Oh, lots of comments. All right. Okay. So Nabra, Andy Nguyen, please add the Dewey, Reams, and Vulgate to your toolbox. Yeah, the Vulgate is interesting because there's a number of additions to the Vulgate, and they don't all agree. So it's actually been a little bit of a hassle to work with the Vulgates because sometimes they're not reported as such when there are differences. It's an interesting, and of course with more manuscripts of the Vulgate than we have of the Greek New Testament, the textual question surrounding the Vulgate is like way even crazier than what it is for the Greek New Testament. So Nick says, some Some has changed, meaning slightly since 1611. Hebrews 3:16, for example, the some is a majority. I think it meant some as in a part, be it big or small, but some in most footnotes is weird. Yeah, some just doesn't work out. And even if that's the case, we would expect that in the KJV, but we wouldn't expect that in a note from a modern English reader. So yeah, I think some is just one of those words that really, I didn't even know that, actually. I didn't even know that. See how helpful the word some is? But Nick, you're bringing clarity. Awesome. All right, Pastor Brett. Oh, you just whipped it up, Abby. I'm sure I missed something there. Amen, Nick. Andy Nguyen, and when he had said these things, the Jews went out from him, having much reasoning among themselves. The Acts, yes, DRC 1752. Which Vulgate? So Ross Lewichuk says, Boyd, 29, after Paul said these things, the Jews went away and had a great dispute among themselves. 87.6%. NASBL, note, ECM encloses this text with double brackets. Okay. Now, the reason why he has 87.6% there, this would be my guess, is there's a few other variants within this verse. I think when you look at the TUT edition, there's sort of three subtypes or three sub-variants of this whole verse, and they're usually smaller things like the verb, the dispute, is actually a noun in one of them as opposed to a verb. There's a couple of them where an article is switched out. There's a few in there where the words are like back and forth in different word order and stuff. Those are the things that don't typically affect the meanings, and those are the kind of errors that you typically find when you're looking at different manuscripts. That's just the way that it happens. These aren't, unlike the last one we looked at with 51 different variations, these variants don't seem to decry that there's any sort of like back translation or anything like that going on. We're looking at articles that are in there or aren't. There's one with the dative case versus the dative case with N. These are not very big issues as far as like, I don't think someone would look at this and go, oh, look at all the different variants. That means it's not original. Like we're not there. It's not close to that. So when you say 87.6% have that standard form, which we see in the Byzantine text, and then the remaining 9% represent these other little variants. And usually there's like one or two manuscripts which have this odd reading. Again, that's not, I don't think that's a game changer in this one, but yeah, so 95% is when you take all of those various ways, the verses, and put them together. But yeah, 87 is the way it's specifically in the Byzantine text. All right. So Andy Nguyen has the Clementine Vulgate. Pastor Brett, he's going on about intrusions and tampering. Andy Nguyen has the Greek there. Ke tuto avtu ipontos, apilthon hi judeu, Pauline hontes eneavtis sidzitisin. Acts 28:29. Family 35. Very good. Yeah, and I think it's essentially the same in all. Interestingly enough, though, the Complutensian Polyglot tends to go with a version which has the, I think it's the adjectival form instead of the verbal form of sitisisin without the sin prefix. So it's, this is, the Complutensian Polyglot is a little bit on its own there. And I think there's like 6 or 7 manuscripts that go with that. So Pastor Brett, if you love the NKJV, then stick with it, not the notes. I like the notes, Pastor Brett. Miss Moreno's retracting messages. I thought that the only Scrivener edition of the TR had it. I don't think so. I didn't look at the specific editions, but I'm also inclined to think that, if other TR editions didn't have it, that it would have come up like pretty quick in my research. So Get Gnome says Gigas manuscript. Oh, nah. Yeah, so Gigas manuscript. I'm going to do a video on that. It's a huge manuscript with this giant devil like printed on one of the pages. So strange. So strange. Put that on the front altar of your church. All right. Stephanus TR. He's got it there. Yeah. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak. Erasmus First Edition Latin Translation et cum haec. Yeah, I'm not going to try. I'm going to get there. I swear. I've got the books. I'm doing it. I'm going to do it. Somebody's sending me some books too for the Latin stuff. I'm looking forward to it. Pastor Brett, which Peshitta? No one says. No one says. This is why it gets frustrating working with some of the ancient versions, because there's not a lot of details on them. There's just not many. There really is not many details at all on the ancient versions. So the ending of Erasmus versus the Clementine Vulgate is a bit different. Probably. Beza 1598, which I understand to be a major vorlage for the KJV, has it. I'm curious if there's a good explanation for exclusion. Homoiotauton does not work in this passage. I looked at that. It doesn't. It just doesn't. There's a couple instances where potentially you could explain half the verse, but not the whole verse. So we have a note from Erasmus. The Internet Archive. Yes, the Internet Archive is back, and I am so glad the Internet Archive is back. All right. Thank you, Ross. Thank you for the $5 there. We'll get down to your comment real quick here. The Internet Archive is back. Yes, it is. Westcott and Hort. A mixed manuscript doesn't have samplings in it from all the text types. Typically just 2 of them, usually Biz and Alex. It probably was copied from a manuscript that was corrected from one type to another. Yeah, probably. And this is the interesting deal. This is an interesting deal with the mixed manuscripts. Is my understanding with CBGM is it doesn't handle mixture very well. So I'm curious as to what's happening there. Daniel Buck, Codex D is the Gospel and Acts. Yes, I might be mixing something up when I spoke earlier. When I go to Bible Hub, I usually guess at the URL. Yeah, so much easier than clicking. I take Chrysostom as more reliable over 2 random Alexandrian manuscripts with unknown provenance. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some truth there. So it turns out Chrysostom was the earliest and best witness all along. Indeed, he was. He is. And this for me has some implications. Mr. Moreno, the Clementine Vulgate is on the Bible Gateway. The Stuttgart Vulgate, which tries to reconstruct the original text, is on the Blue Letter Bible. Interesting. So 87.6 is still not too bad, though. No, it's not. And you would argue for the other like 9% too, because the variants are typical of what kind of mistakes you would make when writing things down. Ruach Within. How's it going, Ruach? What do you think of Revelation 13:10? Is the KJV right or the ESV? Is that the 666 one? The 616666? Because I'm totally for 666. Let me rephrase that. Somebody's going to take that out of context, and there's going to be a video of me going, I'm totally for 666. Okay, what I mean by that is I believe 666 is the original reading, not 616. Did a live stream. That was actually one of the first live streams I did back in the day, which was actually like maybe 6 months ago. So take a look at the videos back there. I think we can blame the Donatists for propagating 616 as far as it went. It was never really fully propagated, but they really did push it out there. Ross Lewichuk, again, thanks for the $5. That helps towards getting some gear and getting the live stream to be as reliable as possible. So thank you. You're a funny dude. All right. Scott says, we're not looking at Revelation 13:10 tonight, but the Byzantine is always right. Nice. It's a stanza. It's a poem. It works. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak, didn't the original Peshitta only have 22 books? I think so. Thanks, Scott. Ross Lewichuk, yay, Golden Mouth. I missed something there. And then Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak. 666 1318. That's right. I'm not sure what's referenced in 1310. Maybe I'll write it down and keep a log of some of these, and we'll look at them in the future. So yeah, just for those who are asking about variants, it takes me anywhere between 3 and 7 hours to do the research and to looking at what variants are doing what. So it's very difficult to do on the fly. I tried to do it. So funny story, when I was interviewed by Stephen, I tried to do some work on the fly for Colossians, I think it was 2:22, and man, I just looked like an idiot. I need the time to process through stuff. I looked like a total noob, which maybe I kind of am a little bit of a total noob sometimes. But I need the time to process through. This is part of the reason why I haven't really done any debates either, because I just need time to process and go through it with all angles. So, all right. Okay. So let's take a look at this map here, and I'm going to pull my spreadsheet over on my other screen here so I can start plotting things out. Where to go here? So Now, when we talk about, yeah, there we are. So when we talk about a Western manuscript, I can grab a color here, red. We typically talk about a geographical location in the West Mediterranean. So typically, we're generally, okay, speaking of this area, okay? Now, I'm just generalizing here, but this is generally what we talk about when we talk about Western manuscripts. So a lot of Old Latin, this is where your Latin manuscripts come from, right? We got Lyons here, we've got Rome here, we got Spain. I think somewhere around here is Carthage. Excuse me. These are all of the places where typically Western manuscripts are from. And so when you have an old Latin manuscript, Latin manuscripts coming from this general area, because that's where Rome spoke mostly in the Latin tongue, right? So that's where all of our Latin translations typically come from. Now, you could argue that Jerome, I think in Antioch, had produced the Vulgate in the 400s. But the Vulgate has a slightly different flavor than the old Latin manuscripts do. So there are some differences there, but we talk specifically about Old Latin when we talk about Western readings. And if, again, we take a look at what we have, they're all very late with the exception of two. So can we have two from the 6th century? What about the 4th century and the 3rd century? And this is a lot of time that's going by here. Now, when we talk about Alexandrian manuscripts, typically what we're talking about is this little region right down. I don't have it far enough here. But we're talking about manuscripts which come from this area here, okay, from Egypt. In fact, we could probably even narrow that a little bit further and a little bit south of there. So there's a number of dialects of Coptic in the southern portions of Egypt, which tend to come out of there as well. And again, these dialects, aside from the Sahidic and Baharic, are typically late, and we see them sometime later than the 10th century. The Sahidic apparently goes back to the 3rd of the 4th century, with the Baharic being kind of like the next evolution of the language. So Sahidic is typically earlier, Baharic is next, and then you have Fayumic and a few others which are much later. So that's what we refer to when we talk about Alexandrian manuscripts. Caesarean manuscripts are typically arranged around here in the area of Caesarea. And then we have the Byzantine manuscripts, which typically represent, and there's a bit of overlap here, everything in this region here. Okay, this is what we're talking about when we're talking Byzantine manuscripts. Okay, so these are the general locations. I'm sure there's probably some places I've missed or overlapped or whatever. But that gives us an idea of where these manuscripts are. So when we're plotting out these Western readings, the question is when all of the manuscripts here, aside from one, aside from one, they all contain the reading. Every Byzantine reading has it in there. When we talk about Chrysostom, we speak about, and this is where it gets interesting, we speak about a guy who was in charge of the church in Antioch, right here, Antioch, and right here, because he moved later on in life and became the bishop of the church in Constantinople. So in the late 300s, about the same time as Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, earlier than those manuscripts from the West, we have our reading in Acts 28:29. So the suggestion that this manuscript, that this reading in Acts 28:29 came from the West, well, we don't have any early manuscripts earlier than what we see from Chrysostom's quote to suggest otherwise. At best, we could suggest that maybe it was an Alexandrian reading as opposed to it being a Western reading. But then when you have Chrysostom early in the East, in the Byzantine area, in the Byzantine Empire, I mean, the Byzantines came a little bit later. But you have these streams of manuscripts with Byzantine readings coming all out of this area, are all pointing back to something that's happened here. So the question becomes this, is we have kind of early manuscripts of Acts here in the West, up to the 6th century. We have 3rd and 4th century manuscripts down here in Alexandria, Egypt. But why don't we have anything other than 9th century manuscripts here in the East? Well, the issue is the climate just would not allow for these manuscripts to be preserved down to our ages, right? So we rely on the later minuscules. Now, the thing about the later minuscules, the Byzantine manuscripts, is we often see them as like one big monolithic thing of manuscripts. But really what it is these manuscripts are kind of subdivided into families, right? The two most popular ones are KX, which represents the biggest chunk of Byzantine manuscripts, and then KR, or Family 35, right? That's Pickering's work. And then there's K1 and KI and Family Pi, even you would consider Family Pi. These are all streams which come out of the Byzantine area, and these did not influence each other. So what does that mean? That means in the 9th century, these various streams of Byzantine manuscripts point back to something further. And it is almost certainly not pointing back to something out here in the West. It is pointing back to something that our friend Chrysostom was looking at in Constantinople and Antioch. So for me, that just does it. I mean, that for me brings this into a Byzantine reading. So I think Metzger, when he suggests that it's a Western reading and that the Byzantines adopted it, I think it's the other way around. I think it at best, right? If we want to go with the critical text reading, we could say it's an Alexandrian reading. A Byzantine reading. Sorry, I'm looking at that wrong. We would say it's a Byzantine reading, which was adopted by the West. Now, I get it, right? We're all going to say, well, but we don't have anything before the 9th century in the... I know. But we also know that there was stuff there before the 9th century. And we also know that these various streams of Byzantine families coming out of there alludes to something being there before. And again, when we come back to the church father, to Chrysostom, between 357 and 407 AD, referencing this verse, we know that the Byzantine manuscripts are referencing that. You can see all my scribbling there. I hope you find that helpful. You see all my scribbling there, showing essentially, and I think that the conclusion again is that the Byzantine manuscripts, the Byzantine text type, again, if you go with modern eclectic reasoning and that there's no longer text types aside from this family of manuscripts, which is cohesive, the Byzantine text, then I don't see why we don't recognize this, or why it's not recognized that this is part of Scripture. It goes back much earlier than anyone really realized. So that's it. That's what I have here for Acts 28 to 29. This is for me is 95% or 87.5 in this exact form is from our Byzantine manuscripts. We have early reference to it in the East, which shows us where this reading propagated from. We have attestation to it in the West, and we have attestation to it in Alexandria. There are a few Alexandrian minuscules that contain it. I didn't show them, but there are some. So this is definitely, even from a Sturzian perspective, you would claim this as original. From a Byzantine perspective, you would claim this as original. From a majority perspective, you would claim this as original. From a Textus Receptus priority, you would claim this as original. It's only the critical editions and the modern critical method which would say that this isn't original. So there, that's the conclusion. This one was kind of a fun one. When I found Chrysostom and linked them together, it was just like, oh, that's so cool. Hope you enjoyed that. Let's pop over to the comments and see what y'all are saying. Excuse me. All right. Ross Lewichuk, St. John Chrysostom was given the name Golden Mouth. That makes sense. Okay, because of his eloquence as an orator, but also because he gave such stirring and thought-provoking homilies as a priest and a bishop. Yeah, it's really interesting. When I was reading a little bit about him in the Wiki article, you were given the impression that this guy really, really loved the Word of God, and loved to like share it and loved to explain it. And he, I don't. Someone was saying that he was bishop of Antioch, But I don't think he was bishop of the church in Antioch. He was definitely bishop in Constantinople a little bit later. But the reference I saw was him being a deacon. He was elevated to a place of deaconship in Antioch, and it was there that he wrote his homilies. So technically, when we talk about his reference, and this is interesting, when we talk about his reference in his homilies to Acts 28:29 and Acts 28:17, this is in the early part of his ministry, right? So if we come back to our map, it's in the earlier part of his ministry. This is like the round two, I would say around 375. Again, this puts this on par with with Sinaiticus and Vaticanus as far as dates are concerned. And we know that later on, after he wrote his homilies, he went to Constantinople to become the bishop of the church there. So that's interesting. He's a very interesting dude. I think I would probably want to look at some of his stuff a little further as far as like a biographical idea would be concerned. Shamelessly Googled. Yeah, I Google stuff all the time. It's okay. I Google things all the time. Excuse me. All right. Lots of messages retracted. What are you guys talking about? All right. He knows. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says he mainly uses the NKJV. I do. Go, Dwayne, go. Thanks, Pastor Brett. Where are we here? Scott VM, make Istanbul Constantinople again. Yes, make Istanbul Constantinople again. Let's stick to its historic roots. It makes it easier for us biblical people. All right, Andy Nguyen. I thought Byzantine was a reference to Constantinople. Yeah, well, it's the empire, right? It's the whole region. Generally speaking, we talk about the Byzantine Empire, which was, I believe, was the Constantinople was the capital. At least as we would see it today. I'd have to do a little bit more looking into that. Not just climate, but also persecution. Yes. Yeah, persecution. Yeah. There was definitely a lot of persecution toward the end of the first century and into the second century. So yeah, that would have made an impact as well. But it's hard to say though that's the only thing, because persecution happened all around the Mediterranean. It wasn't just in the East. It was all around. Like, again, we come back to the Donatists, right? The Donatists in Carthage. Let me pull the map back up here. The Donatists would have. Let me grab. I'll just do a different color. What's a good color for the Donatists? How about? I'd say purple, but I don't want to be. I don't want to be aligned with them. How about? Let's do a nice dark color. This red color here. So the Donatists would have started around here, and then they would have propagated out from here. So the Donatist was actually a pendulum swing from when persecution came down from, I think it was Caligula. And so what they would do is they would say, hey, if you don't burn your Bible and rip up your manuscripts, we're going to kill you. And so a number of people didn't actually do that. They handed over their manuscripts and they were destroyed and burned by the emperor. So after the persecution was all done, some of the guys came together and said, hey, those guys who handed over their biblical manuscripts to be burned instead of dying? They're not Christians, and we don't want them to lead in the church. And so that's how the Donatists started up. And that was the heresy that they kind of pushed forward. And then, of course, they had a number of commentaries and such. And I think when you come back to the Mark of the Beast, 616 versus 666, Donatists were a big player in the 616 being kind of spread out. But all that to say is that there was definitely some persecution going on here in North Africa. So when we come to saying, well, there was persecution in the East, there was. But it seems the playing field geographically in manuscripts would have been kind of levelized a bit. But yeah, can I pull some of this off? I can. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Yeah. So the main thing though, I think climate is probably the biggest thing, rather than the persecution. Don't get me wrong, persecution would have seen the destruction of a lot of manuscripts. But I mean, they'd be relatively easy to hide. Maybe they're still hidden. Maybe they're still hidden today. But the climate again will just destroy it. Too much humidity and it's done. All right. So St. John of Chrysostom, there we go, coming down the pike here. Change the scene. I thought Byzantine, yep, not just climate, but also persecution. Don't forget the persecution. Byzantium is the best name. Yes, it is. I like that name. Greek manuscripts were destroyed. Great job, Pastor Dwayne. Thanks, Pastor Brett. Your historical geographic analysis is giving CBGM heartburn. Yeah, it's interesting because CBGM doesn't take this stuff into account. By definition, CBGM isn't really... it doesn't seem, okay, again, I don't fully understand how it works, but CBGM doesn't seem to be interested in the historicity of the manuscript itself, where it came from, who wrote it down, when it was written. Rather, they analyze the readings to try to determine which reading would give rise to another reading, and those judgments are made by text critics, and then they're inputted into a system, and then the system has an algorithm which takes all of those decisions and spits out what the earliest form of something would be for a given variant. And then I think there's a weighting that also gives to readings found in the same manuscript, but it's not the same thing as taking its history into account. So yeah, I think if you ask somebody who works on the CBGM, I think you would find that they would look at the geographical question as not important. They would suggest that manuscripts would have freely flowed all around the Mediterranean world, and there would have been mixture. And so part of that, and this is why I'm looking at the papyrus thing, right? Part of that is when they look at the papyrus manuscripts, again, coming back here, when they look at the papyrus manuscripts, there we go. Here, let's do brown because it's like a papyrus manuscript. So the papyrus manuscripts found here, some of them early, not all of them are early. P74 we looked at today is actually for a 7th century manuscript, which is early comparatively, but not early compared to something like Sinaiticus or Vaticanus or even some of the other papyri. There's a range of dates on the papyri, and we don't often hear of that. We always think they're, wow, 2nd and 3rd century papyri, but a number of them are like 7th, 8th century. So I'm looking to answer that question. But yeah, so what it is with CBGM, I think generally it's assumed that as a microcosm of the entire Mediterranean world, the papyrus manuscripts are supposed to represent this mixture from all the papyrus all around the Mediterranean world. Now, I think that this is an assumption that is very difficult to prove, especially given we don't have any early history of what the manuscripts looked like here in the East. But we also know that manuscripts in the West tend to take on their own flavor, which has become the Western text type. So I don't think this idea specifically holds too much water. Most people who have done analysis on papyrus have typically found very little coherence between the papyrus manuscripts. So there's one or two that may show a few Byzantine readings, and there's another one or two manuscripts which show some affinity with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. But aside from that, they're generally all over the place. So again, CBGM will take that and assume that this is what the manuscript tradition looked like in the rest of the Mediterranean, and then they continue with their work. Whereas I personally would say, well, I think that's too much of an assumption, and I think that what we see in the papyrus is something emblematic of what's happening in that specific geographical region. All right. Yeah, so we're giving CBGM heartburn. Okay. Great job. Scott says, if you enjoyed tonight's stream, remember to give it a like. Oh, thanks, Scott. Thank you. Remember to give it a like and subscribe to your channel if you haven't already. That's right. Like and subscribe. Do all those YouTube things. John was also very generous. Yes, yeah. John Chrysostom was a very stand-up guy from what I'm hearing. So, Scott VM is pointing out the Discord server. So if you are not part of the discussion on the Discord server, join us. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak is giving us lots of updates on some of the stuff that he's working on. The dude is brilliant. He's got lots of really interesting conversation starters there, and he'll make you think. So Get Gnomed says, join the Discord. Helga says, nice analysis of this variant. Thank you, Helga. Gekanon asks, do you know the scholar Chris Stevens? I do not. Has he written any works? What kind of stuff is he doing? Does he got a YouTube channel, or does he write any articles, have any books, that kind of stuff? I'd be interested. Constantinopolis, Constantine City, yes. Byzantium, Byzas City. Black for Donatists. Oh yeah, black for Donatists. I could have, yeah. I didn't see the comments because I had the map up, and I still have the map up. Let's pop over to the. There we go. So okay, maybe I just like Byzantium because it's the name in the W.B. Yeats poem. I don't know. Byzantium sounds cool. Like it just. There's some words that just sound really dumb, right? Let me give you an example. Like muffin. I don't like the word. It just sounds really dumb. Like muffins are good. Don't get me wrong. They're tasty. But the word, I just don't like the way it rolls off the tongue. You know what I mean? Byzantium, on the other hand, there's power in that name, you know? No, I'm not talking about Jesus. Jesus, obviously there's power in the name of Jesus, but there's just like a thing about the word Byzantium. All right. Scott says coherent-based genealogical method. Sounds like he's answering the question of what does CBGM mean? Coherence-based. We could probably pull that apart. Genealogical method refers to basically making a family tree out of manuscripts, but instead of manuscripts, it's called coherence-based because it's not making a genealogical method of manuscripts, but it's making a genealogical tree of readings that are in the manuscript. So it's a very important distinction, but that's why it's called coherence-based genealogical method. So it takes all the readings, which typically are the same, uses those readings to determine what the reading was that came out of that. That's the coherence part, and then it makes a family tree of all these readings. That's the genealogical method part. Yeah. All right. So LL, I'm crazy, not brilliant. Dude, you've got a lot of good stuff on there. Don't the two often go hand in hand? Which two? Did I miss something? He's laughing. Chimera-based genealogy. That's funny. Chimera-based genealogical method. Yes. All right. What's the next variant? Brudder. A brudder. Is he that little dog with no front legs? Help me, brudder. I think that's anyone know of a Homestar Runner? That's a Homestar Runner reference. I think that's Andy, is that a Homestar Runner reference? All right. Let me see. I'll take a look at my spreadsheet and see what the next one is. I think it's in Romans. You're seeing all of my documents there. Let me see. Romans, where are you? Missing verses, Byzantine versus KJV. It will be Romans 16:24. So the end of Romans. Okay. So that's your answer. Romans 16:24. We're going to take a look at that next week. Yeet. Nitpicky pedantry. Yeats is pronounced Yates, not Yeats. Yeah, nitpicky indeed. Okay. Chimera-based genealogical method. I'm not sure what I'd call my hypothesis. Lil Brother is from a strong bad email. Yes, it is. The effects of gasoline on fire. I love it. Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of you guys grew up with Homestar. That's fun. He has the heart of a champion. Dagron. I'm sad that I'm flying. Okay. All right. I'm quoting Homestar Runner, which means that we're about done. Let's see. Brother is German. Oh, okay. Brother is German for brother. Okay. I totally made a what do you call that when you take something? Andy, I don't know any German. I'm sorry. Sprachen mi Deutsch. That's about as far as I can go with German, and I don't even know what that means. It just sounds German to me, so I say it when people say German. So, which is too bad because I can't really read all of the German material that's coming out. I know there's a lot of New Testament textual stuff that's written in German. I can't read it. But we are in a day and age where I could pop it into Google Translate if I really need to take a look at some of that stuff. So I think I was 25 when I first saw the Strong Bad videos. Yeah. One of my favorites is the, what would you look like as a Japanese cartoon? I have really cool boots, like robot boots, man, and blue hair. Gotta have blue hair. Okay. All right. That's my sign. That's it. That's time to go. Time to go. The numbers are dropping. Everyone's leaving because of my Homestar Runner impressions. So you and Bruder is pronounced as a ooh. Bruder. Bruder. Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay, guys, I'm gonna kick off here. Thanks for joining me, everybody. We're gonna be taking a look at Romans next week, as long as everything rolls out. Got a few interviews lined up, so thanks for everybody who has supported the channel thus far by your likes and subscribes. Please do so. That pushes this out into the algorithm, and it takes the not very popular subject of textual criticism and makes it just a little bit more popular. All right. Anyway, brothers and sisters, until next time.